Mm. Good evening. Well, good evening if you're on this side of the world. Good morning to most of you. Nice to be with you again. I thought today I would have most of the satsang being question interactions between you and I. Anyone who wants to ask a question or make comment or have interaction, feel free to do so. You can put your hand up and I'll get to you shortly. I wanted to reiterate certain points that I thought were important. One is I haven't been uploading so many videos onto YouTube after the satsangs, and so I've got some comments from people saying it'd be nice if you put more uploads up, which I will do. I appreciate the comments. But it also reminds me to reiterate that I think listening to satsangs more than once, in fact 7, 8, 10, 20, 30 times, is a very powerful and important practice. We tend to, the doership and the fact that we miss how we process things, that we are processing things through a relative filter, which means hearing it through our conditioning, and we miss often the fact that we are conditioned and that hearing something new over and over again is very powerful at reconditioning. Now, so if someone listens to the satsangs, these satsangs, and they listen to each satsang once and they listen to 100 of them, there's a consistency in the satsangs. So that in a way is new conditioning that is being delivered consistently, and that has the ability to change one's up-to-date conditioning, especially if something that is said hits home. It can change by listening to one satsang, clearly, but there's also so much to the framework, or so many different layers, that we're often not ready to hear certain parts until some other changes have been made. So listening to these satsangs once and listening to 100 of them, for example, is how the change happens. It's part of the new conditioning becoming part of our up-to-date conditioning and sort of replacing some of the old conditioning. But if you listen to one satsang 10 times, that has a very powerful effect, because you'll start to hear phrases that you like the way they sound, you like the way that maybe my accent or something says it, and you'll start repeating those phrases. When you listen to the satsang, you come up to a certain point or all the way through it, and you know what's coming next, and you can start to answer it yourself before I've even said it, because you've heard it regularly. So, and this is something that we would tend not to do, because we've got the attitude, oh, I know that. I've seen it, I've heard it. So it has no value in a way. Let me listen to something new, something I haven't seen and something I haven't heard. And it's like listening to a song or a movie or a book. And we often wouldn't read a book a second time, or watch a movie a second time, because we say, oh, I've seen that. And for those movies that you do watch a second, a third, a fourth, a 10th time, you often get something new out of it. And if you're not getting something new out of it, it's reinforcing something that you would have received out of it previously. And that reinforcing means it's going deeper. So there's hundreds of satsangs. If you listen to them 10 or 20 times, you won't run out, not in a hurry, and by that time you can start listening to them 21 times or thereabouts. Anyhow, that point is not so much about the video uploads, but more to make the point that hearing something, the same words in exactly the same sequence over and over, is very powerful. The process of change is a process of essentially breaking down existing belief structures that force us to see life a certain way, and we might not see the correlation between a belief or a concept and how we experience life. It might not be apparent that is how the process works. But I think it's very clear once we've seen those structures collapse and then see the subsequent changes, we see how believing something or understanding something a certain way, often the wrong way, leads to a certain interaction in life, a certain set of feelings in the body, feelings that we might think they can't have anything to do with my beliefs, uncomfortableness, aggression, anxiety, or just senses of not feeling like you're in the right place, not in flow. And it's very much got to do with how things are being processed, and a lot of that is through our cognition, and our cognition at its base is very much about how we see, how we understand life. And so when one of those structures, one of those cognitive structures of misunderstanding starts to be looked at by the system itself, and that structure then starts to be seen more and more clearly as being misguided, being a problem, it starts to fall away. And as it falls away, what that means, the falling away means it starts to get less concrete, less concentrated, and so then it as a structure starts to be seen because it's less concentrated. When it's really concentrated, it's essentially invisible as a belief system. It can't be seen as something that could be different. It just is felt like this is the way I am, and it is, and it doesn't seem changeable. Once it starts being brought into light, the light of awareness, essentially, awareness is what is able to be aware of anything, feelings, responses, our attitude. It's awareness, and it's not only awareness on its own, it's awareness plus a guiding light of the intellect. And we might think, change doesn't happen because of the intellect. It's only awareness that changes things, and often our idea of awareness is some superpower. But when we look at it, it's a concept gets delivered to us in the teaching, or someone says, hey, look at this, and the way that they suggest that you look at something brings about a seeing of it, of that dynamic. It might be, to give you an example, someone says, if you use those garden implements and you don't put oil on there, what happens is it seizes up, just like is happening in your garden with your garden equipment. And it might not have been anything that you've ever been told. You always thought the machines weren't running so well, and then that information gets you to start looking, and maybe you add some oil to one of the machines and it works so much better. And so there is awareness of the fact that it was making noises, that it wasn't working so well. There is awareness of the information, but there is the information, and the information is heard essentially by the intellect. And then there is some action of change. In this case, in this example, it would be adding the oil and then being aware of the benefit. And so from that point on, you will know that oil needs to be added to the machines for it to work well. So in the teachings are essentially giving information to the intellect, the working mind, the working part of the intellect, the functional aspect of the intellect, and bringing our attention to dynamics that tend to be in place, set in place, as part of the very ordinary biological development from the point of conception to the birth and development beyond that point. We develop in pretty much a consistent way. An example of that is speaking and babies walking. Now, sure, there can be a difference. I don't know when babies start to speak. I'll probably get this very wrong, but let's say at 14 months, you could have someone that a baby starts speaking, and another baby might not speak till 20 months or 24 months. So there's a difference. Someone can say, well, there's a difference. But generally speaking, if we looked at it across all babies, there'd be an average, and the average might be 16 months. And then there's going to be some outliers either side of that. And how that process happens, why it happens. Now, parents don't really teach children to speak. We might think that the parents teach the children to speak because the children speak. So our assumption is, well, someone must have taught them to speak, otherwise they wouldn't speak. But parents don't know how to teach children how to speak. They might point at various things, say apple and teddy bear and mummy and daddy, and that helps, but it's part of it because parents do that. But by and large, the vast process of language setting in is as a result of observation and seeing patterns, and that just happens to the baby, and the baby doesn't even know it. It doesn't set out to learn a language. Learning a language happens to it. It can't help but be changed by the environment it's in, and in the environment it is hearing people speak, and it's putting those words that it hears over and over again. It hears them many, many times in various contexts, and it puts them together. So, the parent pointing at apple is very much how the process happens. But if a parent didn't point at apple, the process would still happen. And so that happens to a child. They essentially get changed by life, by being in life, and by being what we are as human beings, which is a biological instrument with an intellect and awareness. And being exposed to the environment is the new conditioning that then becomes part of the what we can call our up-to-date conditioning, and that up-to-date conditioning is not independent from the genetics, which is the brain and the whole body and everything about that particular person, their particular design, whatever their learning capacity is. So someone with a genetic design that has a high learning capacity and is exposed to certain new conditioning, let's say lots of language, will start to speak probably sooner than someone with a lower learning capacity, a genetic structure, a design that has maybe some, what we might say, some fault in it. Ultimately, it just is what it is. So we only say it's a fault relative to the norm. Let's say it's not really a fault. It's just how it is. But so a certain genetic structure might not have a very good tendency for learning, let's say. Now, a inanimate object, like a rock, doesn't learn. It is exposed to the world, but it doesn't learn in the same way. It doesn't have an intellect. It doesn't have awareness. A animal that is animate but has a lower IQ, less sensory input, will learn differently, and may or may not have the capacity to learn. So a lot of the misunderstanding gets put in place as part of this development that happens. And we're talking about happiness here. All these talks are about happiness. And so happiness is very much linked to unhappiness. It turns out that our happiness, when we can say, I am happy, is because a certain functioning that is our unhappiness starts to get less and less and less, or is not very prevalent in the first place. So it's very important for us to come across that concept, because otherwise we'll think happiness is the gaining of something. That's one of the big misunderstandings. So our design, as it naturally gets put in place, because of the way what we're exposed to, the design says the best we can do in life is try and maximize pleasure and minimize pain. That's the experience of being in life on the surface, and so that gets set in place as that is my mission in life, to maximize pleasure and minimize pain. And so therefore, when we feel as part of our development a sense of dissatisfaction with being in life, a sense of, what is all of this about, a discontentment, maybe a striving for many years, and then just sort of feeling it's pointless, getting these feelings along the way that there isn't a sense of fulfillment. So if those feelings are prevalent, the conclusion that tends to be formed is, it's because I haven't got enough, I haven't achieved enough, I haven't gained enough. And then we start looking at others around us and comparing ourselves to others and seeing how others have more, and so we say, yes, that's why I have these feelings, because I do have less, and if I had more, then things would be different. Now, for a lot of us, it requires us to gain some of those things, not everything. I don't think we need to get everything that we desire. But I think we do need to get a sufficient amount of what we desire, and at the same time as being exposed to concepts like this, that say your happiness isn't to be found in outcomes. So if you get what you desire, but you aren't exposed to the concept, then it appears that we can keep on not getting it and say, oh, well, the next thing will give it to me. So even though we might strive for an outcome and get it and not feel content, so we'll get some pleasure from the outcome, but it won't magically take away this ongoing sense that something is missing. It won't mean that, oh, I got that, which is a bit like, getting a bicycle at the age of 12 doesn't suddenly mean you won't feel discontent at the age of 14 and 20 and 25. And that's what it means by happiness isn't to be found in outcomes. You can look at outcomes like the 12-year-old getting the bike that he craves because it's the thing and it's what he dreams about. So that's an outcome, getting that bike. And we know that to the 12-year-old, there is the assumption that if I get that bike, everything is going to be okay. That the solution to my life is that bike. And we should be able to see that it isn't a bicycle when you're 12 years old, can't be a magic pill for ongoing happiness. And we keep following that misguided concept, deeply ingrained, so it becomes a belief, where we keep projecting our happiness onto the next pleasure, the next bike. And the reason we might not see it even when it is described this way is because some pleasures, some bicycles look different to a physical bicycle in their nature. So we might say, okay, if I want a new BMW, that's the same as a bike. It's just not a bike, it's a car. But it's a material thing. So it can be easy for us to see, oh yes, my happiness isn't going to be found in a bicycle, meaning my happiness, my ongoing happiness for the rest of my life. And it's not going to be found in getting a new car. There's a whole lot of cravings that we have that don't seem to be of the same order as a new car. So one of them is love, a relationship, or friends, or being appreciated, or being... let's look at relationships. That's one set of pleasures, outcomes, that we become convinced, oh, that's why I'm not happy. Success, doing something that is impressive, that we are recognized for, whether it is a charitable contribution that we make, whether it is a business idea, whether it is a sporting achievement or some sort of physical prowess or ability that we have. That might look different again to a new car, a relationship. So success it's still an outcome. It's like if I'm, I don't know, the fastest in the world, or the most intelligent in the world, or not even most intelligent in the world, if I'm just more intelligent than I am now, or more intelligent than my friends, then I could feel good about myself, is what we might conclude. And I will be appreciated. If I invent something, then I will feel like I have done something different to everyone else. I'll feel special, and that will be what fills the void. So all of these examples are outcomes, examples of outcomes. And deep down inside, we have each of us have a specific structure of what it is that we essentially crave. And what we crave means what we think is missing, what we think will give us happiness. And it's always an outcome and a pleasure, essentially. Something that we don't have currently. And your happiness is never to be found in outcomes. And so if that sinks in, we might start to see how on certain days when there is a feeling of uncomfortableness, that it is linked to a narrative about what is missing, what is unacceptable in life. And that narrative is happening automatically. It's like a record that has been set in place based on, let's say, your genes and up-to-date conditioning. Up-to-date conditioning means your past, includes everything that happened in your past. And so there is a narrative. And so if we see this narrative and see it is about that the sense of uncomfortableness is linked to the attitude that my happiness is to be found in outcomes, that my happiness is to be found in life being different, then it's not about judging that. It's not about insisting on it being different, or even wanting it to be different, or even hoping that it's different. It's good enough for us to see that there is a narrative about what is missing that arises simultaneous to the uncomfortableness. And so if happiness is to set in, happiness would look like not getting any of the things that we crave, but rather that narrative and that whole way of seeing our sense of self and where our happiness is to be found falling away. If it fell away, you'd have essentially two different people. There's, let's say, one version which is with the attachment to outcome, which means with the deeply ingrained idea my happiness is to be found in outcomes, and therefore an unhappiness, meaning a sense of uncomfortableness with life already in place. And then, let's say, life magically overnight erases that. Essentially, it's a different person. There's a different structure. And one of the structures will be in their life, and there'll be a certain feeling of lack, of something missing, narrative of what is missing, how to get it, all that. And then the other person, which is essentially a duplicate but with some bits erased, is in the same life situation without that narrative, which really means they're feeling different. Now, the feeling, you can't make yourself feel different. You can only feel different if life brings about that change. So that's one way of describing the dynamic. Now, so it sounds like, okay, if I were to tell myself over and over my happiness isn't to be found in outcomes, then maybe that change will happen. That's one part of the picture. It's not the only part of the picture. So if we listen to all of the satsangs and we're able to extract all of the bits from, let's say, 1,000 of the satsangs and make one super satsang that didn't leave anything out. So there's a lot of repetition, and so you get rid of all of the repetition and you just make one satsang. Maybe it might only be 4 hours long. And it would include everything that's ever mentioned. One of the big ones would be this: your happiness isn't to be found in outcomes. But there'd be a lot of other things as well that tie into that. They all tie into each other. So another part of the change is about seeing the nature of thought, and therefore the nature of the false sense of self, the small self, the self that tends to cover up something less personal, something more permanent. Now that something more permanent, less personal, is something that functions and exists outside of the dimension of thought. So if that part is missed out of the contemplating and what awareness lands on, then a change on that level isn't going to happen, a shift out of thinking, out of the cognitive self and into a resting in being isn't going to happen. And so if we just kept saying, oh, my happiness isn't to be found in outcomes, my happiness isn't to be found in outcomes, we might find that we remain going around in circles in the cognitive mind, where the working mind is reinforcing this very important point, but without the aid of another pointer or another part of our practice that from time to time shifts us out of that and allows us to access a much more silent place of being. And when these things come together, then we find that, when there's a resting in being, then we find that there is a sense of contentment, and we know that my happiness isn't to be found in outcomes. And yet, if someone were to just get told about resting in being, then that might never happen, because the triggers and the craving after the outcomes may keep happening, and there won't ever be anything in the system that says, hey, maybe I shouldn't spend so much energy in reinforcing this idea. Maybe it's about, let me just stop. Stop means, for a minute, let me not go down that track of saying, oh, but life would be better if I had this, I don't have that. And it's like, stop and find that there is a place outside of thought. And so when we're focusing on this being aspect, we need to look at the nature of thinking and see what part of our life experience is made up of thought. How much of our sense of who we are and experience of who we are is about thinking. And this is when one of the important contrasts to bring in when we're looking at thought is the notion of truth or the absolute. And the true self, the less personal essence, which is the part of ourself that we can maybe find ourselves having access to and resting in, we can refer to that as truth or the absolute. Now that technically someone could say, that part of ourself isn't absolute at all, and it's not truth. And in fact, you might find me being the one that says that at some point. And there's validity to that, but there is also validity in looking at the self as something more real, or truth. We can say it is the truth, and it is not relative, it is absolute. Something that is ever present, that is unchanging, that is not an output of a relative instrument. And the brain, which is the part of the biology that creates the thoughts, is very relative. We see that the baby starts to speak, means the brain produces new outputs, language, words, that it wasn't able to produce before. And then as the baby or the child develops, it starts to be able to produce more complex concepts that it wasn't able to produce earlier. And then, as the young adult, child becomes an adult, once again, more complex concepts. And we continue to learn. And that learning is about new conditioning affecting our genetic structure, which is effectively on the biological level. And it's new information coming into the brain and changing the brain so that it produces thought. So thought is very relative. It's very changing. Give someone new information about something, and their understanding about that something is going to change. So they will then talk about it, think about it in a different way. And whatever they're thinking about is not absolute. Even their new way, their more educated or more learned way about the topic is thought, and it is relative. If they get more information, or they see how they are processing something incorrectly in their updated version, then they will get a re-updated version. And so on the level of thought is never unchanging. It is never permanent. It is in the realm of the relative. So our knowledge, our thinking, is always relative and not absolute. And the false self is a sense of self that grows and is built up of the building blocks of thought. Like the sense of self that says, I am not good enough, or I am better than, is a sense of self that exists as part of that narrative. It's not that the sense of self has that narrative. It's the sense of self is that narrative. And when in this case, when I say the sense of self, it's the uncomfortable self, the self that feels uncomfortable in life and is not the true self. The true self is denoted by a capital S, and the small self, or the me, the doer, is small s. The small s self is a conceptual based sense of who we are. And so when that starts to be seen, we get the system itself will start to see the small self as being the narrative that stems out of our genetic structure. Now, we only know ourselves as that until an awakening happens. There's no sense that there is any possibility of knowing ourselves or experiencing ourselves different until an awakening happens. Awakening, in the context that I will use it, really means seeing past the psychological, the conceptual self. seeing past the self that appears so real, feels so real, is all we have ever known ourselves as. And in a moment it is seen in a very direct way. So this seeing is not just an idea that I am not a conceptual self, but it's like the conceptual self is presented on a pedestal as something that you are not. It becomes seen as essentially an object. And in this case, it means it's an object of thought. And when before the awakening, the sense of self was what we could call heavily identified with the psychological self. And so there's no distance, there is no capacity to see it as not what I am. It is felt, this is what I am, and there's no sense that it can change. And in the moment when what we have always known ourselves as gets seen to be something that comes and goes, something that is completely changeable, something that is not often right or sometimes wrong, changes our relationship to our sense of that sense of self in a way that can be quite radical, in a way that can mean the getting lost as that may never happen again. Now, it tends not to happen in a way that there is an awakening and then identification with the psychological self never happens again. It tends not to be like that. It tends to be a series of awakenings, a series of dissolving of the small sense of self dissolving. And that dissolving doesn't mean that certain biological tendencies, personalities fall away. It means that the sense of self is not grounded in any of that. And we use these words like not grounded in any of that. And there's a reason. So that what does that mean? Not grounded in any of that. Because of the seeing, because of seeing things that previously were not seen, things like how our sense of self might be based on certain thinking patterns that are actually quite flawed. So a seeing of that, and a seeing how powerful and how real the sense of self can feel when it is functioning, and then seeing it from a different perspective. The repetitive seeing of that leads to what I've just described as our sense of self is no longer grounded in the conceptual realm. Now, when eventually, if that non-grounding in the conceptual realm remains stabilized for long enough over a period of time, the psychological self dissolves and doesn't exist anymore, because those functions are seen and they stop. What still carries on is the biological movement, which includes personality, it includes the intellect, and so certain ways of functioning that a person might have, peculiarities even that a person might have, even after awakening and a stabilization of that awakening, a deliverance, what we might call liberation. Even after liberation has happened, there can still be odd personality traits, but for that person, which is not something that the other is going to experience, for that person, the sense of self is not grounded where it used to be. Now, if this isn't understood, certain expressions from that liberated, let's call it person, certain expressions from the biological expressions, the body-mind organism, will be interpreted to be psychological structure. So a lot of the seeing is to see the relative, the things that change, and at some point we might have this question that arises: so what is seeing the relative? What is seeing the thoughts, the personality, the emotions, and the awareness or consciousness that is guided in a way by the intellect that is looking at, for example, thought. But once it's been set on its course, that once awareness or consciousness has been directed to look in a certain area, then the seeing becomes much less about the intellect and much more about awareness of a thinking narrative, let's say, that happens, or a thinking dynamic that happens, or a personality dynamic that is happening. And so it is awareness or consciousness. We could say consciousness or awareness of source functioning through a particular body-mind organism that becomes aware of the happening of emotions, the happening of thought, the happening of speech, the happening of the body functioning. So this is where we start to need to bring in the distinction of the biological versus the psychological. There are these two layers in the human being: the biological movements and the psychological movements. And awareness can become aware of both the biological and the psychological. And it will see them as a happening. Because awareness or consciousness, consciousness of source, the absolute, that which is unchanging, that which is not subject to, it doesn't think. It is just aware of what it sees. Or rather, when I say things are seen, what I'm talking about is it is where the light of awareness or consciousness is aware of things it hadn't been aware of previously, because it was forced previously to be identified and grounded inside the thinking, inside the emotion, inside the actions of the person. So from this other perspective, none of that belongs to it. None of that is its doing. It is the silent witness. But not only is it the silent witness, but there is an aspect of that silent witness that is what we can call beingness or existence. And so that when the groundedness or the center of gravity shifts outside of identification with all of the relative, there is a sense of awareness and a sense of existence. I exist. So last week, at the end of last week's satsang, I was saying that at some point when the suffering dynamic falls away, there is an appreciation for just being alive. Now, I don't mean that in some sort of cliched positive thinking sort of way, where we have affirmations about how lucky we are to be alive. I'm talking about, and it's not even about how lucky I am because I get to see the sunset, or because of things in my life, but rather it is about being grounded in the essence of what we are, the true self, that is. It knows that it is. And the shift then moves from the small self is trying to get things. It feels like, oh, the purpose of life is to get what I don't have. That is the feeling when there is a disconnection from this being. So the disconnection from being means that there isn't an innate sense that everything is all okay because I am. What there is, when the small self is prevalent, is the absence of that feeling that everything is okay because I am. There's the absence of that, and therefore there is a whole movement which is a conceptual movement towards the future and towards the past, looking at what went wrong in the past, what we shouldn't have done in the past, what we regret in the past, feeling like our sense of discontent is because of the past, and looking at what we hope to get in the future because that will fix things. So the psychological me is looking at the past and the future, and it is attached. It isn't free. It only knows itself as what happened in the past and what will happen in the future. And the irony is that the present moment gets squeezed out. It doesn't have any real estate. And that's the nature of the conceptual self. The conceptual self doesn't have its own innate sense of existence, free of thought. The conceptual self doesn't exist free of thought. And because that thought is habitual, it doesn't ever get to the system doesn't ever get to experience the absence of the psychological self. And so the thought about the past and the future is always happening, and that means that the present moment is never experienced in its purity, let's say. The present moment is experienced based on what is going wrong in the present moment. And so then the psychological self has a story about what is going wrong, and things are going wrong because it has this very structured idea of how things should be working out, because that's its idea of the future. And so it essentially is always commenting and judging and feeling attacked by the content of life. Sometimes it doesn't feel attacked by the content of life. Sometimes it feels gratified by the content. The content gives it what it wants. But that doesn't actually lead to satisfaction, because that identity simply isn't capable of feeling satisfied except conceptually, and that means it's going to change very quickly. So it's a very fleeting satisfaction. It's a satisfaction of a completely different order to the sense of self that I was pointing at, the sense of, or the sense of fulfillment from the true self. The true self, which essentially is the consciousness functioning through the body-mind organism, which is what we really are, what allows us to be aware of the world, is the fact that there is that consciousness. If that consciousness was switched off, our whole experience would just fall away. That doesn't mean that because it is here, that is enough. Because everyone on earth, everyone that has ever lived, is aware of is aware of life, which means consciousness is functioning. The thing is that awareness of consciousness itself hasn't happened. And so in the absence of awareness of consciousness, there is consciousness identified with the body-mind organism, identified with the relative, and then there is the experience of life from the perspective of I am the body-mind organism, which means I am the body-mind organism and a sense of disconnection from source, a sense of disconnection from self. And the shift into self means there is an innate sense of something that wasn't there before, something very precious that wasn't there before that is there, which is I am, I exist. And the focus completely shifts from what I don't have to what I am already. What I am already, I exist. The purpose of life then becomes, it's not a purpose about getting something. When we think about the purpose of life, we often think, I need to find out what my purpose of life is, or what the purpose of life is, so I can achieve it. And the irony is we find out that if there is such a thing as the purpose of life, I would describe the purpose of life as being already fulfilled. The purpose of life, when there is the connection to that part of ourself, is, that's it. I am, I exist. And it becomes apparent that that is the purpose. The purpose is to be. And so from that point of view, life is essentially an experience. It's what will be in store today in terms of experience. And at some point, the experience ends. And what is lost when the experience ends? So to the sense of self, nothing is lost, because the sense of self doesn't relate to its own being in the same way that the psychological self will relate to things that it owns or things that it feels it is, which is with a sense of attachment and feeling fulfilled by those things. The consciousness knows that it is, and when it is, there is awareness of life. That's when deep sleep then becomes something that is a great contrast to that. It is, in a way, you could say, the opposite. In deep sleep, the sense of self falls away. The sense of the world, the sense of anything existing falls away. And when the person from this place looks at it from the shifted perspective, or where this shift has happened, and there is a groundedness in self, during the day, during the waking state, there is the absence of the suffering, the absence of the uncomfortableness, because there is a groundedness, there is a capacity to, at any point in time, remember, it's not about outcomes, it's about the fact that I am, and it can be a connection, a resting in that, which will cut off any narrative of suffering. If that narrative arises, then it will get cut off and can rest in being. And at some point, after enough months or years of that going backwards and forwards, then we could say there is a resting in self. And so in the waking state, there is still circumstance, still problems on a circumstantial level, but no involvement in those problems. No attachment, which really means no investing. The problems, the outcomes, don't translate into a problem for who we are, who we know ourselves as, whereas they previously very much did feel like a problem relative to who I am. So then it means that things are okay in the waking state, and then in deep sleep, we realize it's not even a question of things are okay. There are no things in deep sleep, and there is no self in its activated form to have a problem or not have a problem. So we could say that deep sleep is absolute nothing. And in practice, deep sleep poses no problems, because any problems would only arise in the waking state and would be problems of the psychological self thinking about, so when we think about deep sleep, the psychological self might say, deep sleep is just pointless. If it's nothing, it's pointless. In fact, I don't want to spend much time in deep sleep, is what the psychological self will say, because it'll say, I won't be able to feel boosted, I won't be able to be trying to get where I'm trying to go if deep sleep is nothing. In practice, in deep sleep, there's no one there to have a problem, and there's no world to cause a problem. So once the psychological self is out of the picture, we find that the waking state has its biological issues still, but no psychological involvement, which means there's peace of mind or happiness, no suffering. And then when we go to sleep at night and there is deep sleep, there's no world, there's no person, no self, true self in its active form, in its movement form, where awareness is present. So in deep sleep, we can say that the self is at rest, not in movement, and that means no awareness and no sense of self. So that's pretty much what death would represent to the person of the waking state. Death is the end of the person in the waking state. Death is the end of the appearance of this world. So where's the problem? The problem will be for the psychological self that says, that doesn't sound very good. And don't get me wrong, I think I'm quite afraid of not the concept of death, but I think if I was presented with a situation where I was going to be killed, I think there would be a biological fear about being killed. Like, how is it going to happen? It could be quite painful. So that wouldn't be something that I'm looking forward to. But the concept of being dead, that's not a problem. That part of it isn't problematic at all. It'd be very problematic to the psychological self. So we have to understand the difference is the process of dying, which is a biological phenomena, and it's a biological situation that we have to go through, is different to the notion of death, of being dead. So the shift, the focus shifts onto I am, and life is here, and so while it's here, it is experienced. But when it ends, whether it's in a week's time or in 50 years' time, that's it. That's the end of the experience. The end of what we could say is like a dream. A dream is an experience. I did say that I would spend most of the satsangs having question and answers. So, see, I have no idea. Gurleen has her hand up. Hi, Gurleen.
Hi, Roger. Happy New Year.
Thank you to you too.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I am grateful you took the time to explain everything that you did. It kind of covers everything. And I had 3 or 4 questions, and 2 of them are totally gone. So thank you for covering it already.
Okay, good. I'll consider what I said as answers then.
It does, yes. I did have just a question. I find myself interested in engaging in mantra recently. And I just wanted to ask, when it comes to resting in being, like, is mantra useful, or what are the implications of being interested in mantra sadhana, and what can it bring about? Just wanted to understand that as it comes to this teaching.
Well, if mantras have an effect, they probably have an effect because it's being carried out as a practice in the right way. What I mean by the right way is there are some ways of that people will practice practices that are clearly not how they are intended to be practiced. So, you know, someone might recite a mantra and it would just be about the number of repetitions, for example. It might, so they just have to say something 100 times a day or whatever it is, and they might say it without ever really thinking about what they're saying. And so from their point of view, they're doing mantras. And that might be as pointless as not doing the mantra, or maybe actually even more detrimental, because someone might think they're doing it wrong and might not realize what it is that they're doing wrong, which is in a way keeping them stuck in a certain place. So if often this I am is something that we're told to recite, I am, and it's a good example. Someone can recite it 1,000 times in a day, I am. And if they don't know what they're saying or why they're saying it, it's not actually going to point them to the I amness. And so, you know, I imagine someone could spend a whole lifetime doing an I am mantra and not get anywhere. I think the power of mantras probably is 2 or 3-fold, more than I would talk about probably. There's powers in certain words and phrases that have been repeated over time, I am told, and I have sensed that. So there can be a vibration, let's say, that exists in the mantra. The mantra itself can switch the cognition into a different mode simply because of what the words are saying. They can be quite soothing, let's say. Prayer could be the same as that. It could be a prayer that switches the brain out of flight and fight mode into a relaxation. It could be a prayer that is a prayer where one is told that, you know, you are looked after, you are cared for, you are loved. and repeating that can calm the system down, because what might be our default movement is I am not looked after, I'm not safe, I have to struggle in life. And so that prayer or mantra might counteract that other narrative. It can also be something that occupies is an activity that, if it is done with focus, means the thinking mind can't function simultaneously. And so it's a way of occupying the intellect space with an activity that is not a psychological movement, is not from the psychological self. And so that means that the psychological self doesn't get to function as prevalently when that process is going on. And fourthly, I think the mantra can point the seeker, or whoever's saying the mantra, it can get them to think about what the words are of the mantra, what it's pointing at. It can be a reminder that shifts us into a different space, a space that has delivers more peace, because ultimately, if it delivers more peace, it's because there is less capacity for the thinking mind to be functioning. So in all of the examples of how I think mantras might be useful, it is where essentially it is shifting us out of the thinking mind into either the working mind, or out of the working mind even into being.
Yes, thank you, Roger. And that's what I find mantra is helping in. It's kind of a stop moment. So as the psychological mind would be functioning in its habitual patterns just out of nowhere, or even sometimes I find myself setting up a time and doing it for half an hour, or whatnot. Mm-hmm. And what it does is that psychological pattern is cut off for that time, or for the moment that the mantra is being repeated. Mm-hmm. And that just somehow maybe is weakening the force of the suffering narrative.
Yeah, I think so. And the fact that it's a practice, a spiritual practice, also means, I think, that while you're doing it, your focus is on, it's a bit like meditation, or it's a form of meditation, I guess, or is that your intention and your focus is to be outside of the thinking mind. So once you sit down to do that practice, it very much is going to be a time when your focus is on the dimensions, or on the dimensions that have been pointed at, or awoken by your spiritual path. And so it serves as a bit like going to the gym. It's a period in the day where you are fully focused on just that.
Yes, and that's such a perfect name you gave it, spiritual gym. I'm going to remember that. And I did want you to report something as well, Roger. I don't know if you remember, but last time we talked about the drive to be perfect spiritually as a manifestation, and then the suffering around having to come up with answers when people ask, what are you doing in life? And basically there was no answer to that. So those two narratives, and I am really grateful to you for that as I expose them, whether my intellect finds an answer or finds a pointing that it can work on for that narrative or that functioning, as I expose, it itself somehow breaks it down.
Mm.
And just wanted to report that those narratives and those functionings are already seen to be weaker. And I have no clue how it happened. Nothing consciously, anything that I did, but just all I can point to is just reporting it to you, exposing it, and then you're counteracting it with the pointing. Just somehow does magic. So thank you.
Oh, well, that's great. I'm glad you're seeing that change. Thanks, Gurleen. Holger, hello.
Yes, hello, Roger. Good
Hi.
to see you.
Nice to see you, Holger.
Can
Nice
you
to
hear
hear
me?
from you. Yes, I can.
I had this idea with your live YouTube streams. I get a notification about your unlisted videos in my notification bell in the upper right on YouTube.
Mm-hmm.
And one idea would be, I have a website, it's called friendsofrogercastillo.com.
Right.
Something I really never did anything with it. But one idea would be, I wanted to suggest I could post satsangs there until they're posted on your channel, just as an idea, without any attachments.
Yeah, well, I mean, one of the reasons that they don't get posted is because I don't have the urge for them to go up, because it's very easy for me to put them up. Should I get driven to do that? Which seems like it's much less of a conscious thing. It's not, I don't, I just find that each day goes past and I haven't done it. And so I think, oh, that's that. Which, you know, we could say, oh, well, that's, this is a suggestion to make it different. But I sort of feel like the ideal place for them to be would be on the channel if they're going to be up. So if they don't make their way up themselves up, make them their way up on the channel, I sort of feel like that's life happening. And I often think, oh, I should, you know, last week's satsang and the week before, I thought I'll put that one up. It's been a while. And then this week goes past and it didn't get put up. And so I look back on that and I think, oh, that's interesting that it didn't. Not only that's interesting, I also look back at the development of the whole teachings. You know, a long time ago, people said to me, it would be great if you put 10-minute clips up or 15-minute clips up, because they're much more digestible and more shareable. It would get more interest into the teachings. And I completely agreed with it. And it sort of was on my list of, yes, let's find clips out of the satsangs that address topics that people would like. It's completely logical. And yet it hasn't happened over the course of the 6 or 7 years that it had been mentioned. And on the one hand, I think it's a great thing that it hasn't happened, although it would have its benefits had various clips, short clips, gone up. It might have increased the amount of viewing by quite a lot. It also might have meant that on these satsangs we have a whole lot of people that are from a more diverse place, and the interactions might be different. It might degenerate down into more debate and argument, and you never know. So I think, and it also means that people are sort of forced in a way to watch a 2-hour video, and so if someone watches a 2-hour video, you know, or even clicks on a video that says that it's 2 hours, they're interested, they're really dedicated to it, and so it means, and I think that's very positive for. As a seeker, we would like to consume little bites, I think, or not just as a seeker, but as the doer in us that is craving things. It goes, oh, let me have this small, not too much effort. I can listen to this small clip, and maybe this, in a way, forces people to hear something a bit differently. So. When I say it's interesting that it hasn't happened, I look back on the organic unfolding of certain things and say, oh, it seems to have an order to it. So I'll make an attempt to upload some more of the unlisted ones so that more of them appear on the channel. But thanks for the offer, Holger. I appreciate the offer.
Welcome. Is there a sense of responsibility on your side that you have been gifted this teaching and that it's not only for your private entertainment?
Yeah, well, that's one of the reasons why 6 years ago I started offering formal retreats and satsangs and traveling, because I got in a way what felt like a message. And it was probably what looked like a message was my internal processing of the situation, in such a way that I felt, yes, you know, you can't just sit on this information. And as time goes on now, I feel less and less of a obligation to continuing that. It may still continue, but now that there's, I don't know, 200, 300, maybe 400, I'm not sure how many videos on YouTube, I could almost say, well, if someone's interested in the teaching, there's plenty of content up there. But for now...
Roger, what for me makes the difference is the human interaction. I mean, because when I watch YouTube videos, I'm only in my own bubble, in my own me bubble. Mm-hmm. Being able to talk to you, this is so precious, and I'm very grateful for the satsangs. They made such a big difference in my life, to have this human interaction and to make it alive, the teaching. Uh-huh. This is so beautiful.
All right, well, I'll keep
thank you.
Keep doing them for now. Thanks, Holger. Isabel, hello.
Hello, Roger.
Hi, Isabel.
Nice to talk to you again.
Yes, nice to see you.
I'm in a funny mood those days. I was asking myself, what happens once you have surrendered? Once you surrender, that means for a few months now things happens, happy things, less good things, and it's just goes on me like if it was imperméable. I don't know the word, you know, when you don't get wet anymore. When the rain comes, you don't get wet anymore. It just goes. Mm-hmm. And so I feel in a state that everything is fine. Okay, I don't take things personally. I just witness them. And I say, oh, I was waiting for something to happen. For example, I had a rendezvous and it doesn't happen. Well, that's fine. And then, or it happens and then that's fine too. And then it's this sort of surrendering, leave a space for lots of things to happen. but in the same way, it's sort of very flat. It's like I'm feeling there are still those biological emotions, or I feel happy or I feel sad, but globally it's really flat. And so I was wondering, what is the surrendering? Is this always flat?
You get surrendered, right? It's not really you surrendering.
Yes.
You find that at a certain time surrendering happens because the body-mind organism sees the futility of fighting. It sees a whole lot of things, and so then there is a putting down of the weapons, let's say, and
yes,
and you do find yourself maybe indifferent to a lot of things. And there's a particular part of the process which is when the habit of attachment, which still which we have a tendency for, so there's a certain phase where that attachment habit is being diminished, and it's that phase that tends to feel flat, because something is happening, and it seems like, you know, you can't, it doesn't make sense to interact with people, that the juice, the joy has been sucked out of things. And if it wasn't, we'd probably get attached again, because it's in that phase when the attachment still hasn't been completely wiped out. But what we're seeing is that it seems like the attachment isn't present because I'm having this response, the response you described of being indifferent, and that is the process of the attachment weakening significantly. And I think at some point you wake up and things are different, not big different, but you will see that this feeling that you're describing won't be there anymore. So it'll be different like that. It'll be noticeable. And in a way, that's when the seeking process is finished, or that particular phase is finished. And then you say, well, I've just got to get on with life now. No more seeking. It's like, what else is there to think about, or to, because like when the process isn't finished, you do have to still, the thoughts about seeking, the thoughts of the concepts need to keep coming up. They need to keep happening at the same time as, let's say, when your meeting didn't happen, some thinking about the fact it didn't happen in relation to the teaching framework might have happened. So, you know, oh, that's okay. You know, my happiness isn't to be found in meeting this person today. And that needs to happen. That's part of it. That's the deepening. And I think seeking, you know, for a long time, seeking is quite enjoyable or quite entertaining, or seems quite precious that seeking is happening. At some point, we really have, there is this thing that's like, I've had no more seeking, you know, it's like the seeking becomes the problem.
I don't have even this feeling that I have to seek something. It's that's part of the of the thing, and I don't even ask myself what am I seeking or things like that. It's really things are happening, and
mm-hmm.
I just listened to your lot of your satsang. You were talking with Holger. I listened to you a lot on Mixcloud because it's easy for short listenings or listening to you or others. But I do that because it's like you were saying during the satsangs. By repeating things, ideas may come, but I can't say I'm really seeking, because I don't even know what I would seek.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very.
I think when I was talking about seeking, it's not necessarily something you are doing or a seeking thinking, but the seeking process, which at some point is a process that happens where you would say, someone would say, I don't even feel like I'm a seeker, which I think is sort of your response now, is like, but still the process is happening. The seeking process is happening. And I mean seeking as a process, not as, oh, what am I looking for?
Okay.
But I don't get disheartened, because I think when I say the seeking process is happening, it tapers off. You know, it can be intense, and then it gets less and less and less. And if you're at the point where you don't even feel you're a seeker, or you don't feel you are seeking, then that means it's the tail end of the seeking. And this phenomena you mentioned, where you really do feel like things are flat, would be the word I would use. It's a bit flat.
Yes.
It's very much a phenomena, and in my experience, it changes. It becomes. I don't feel like, I wouldn't describe life in the terms that a lot of people describe it as joy and bliss and that. Maybe it's just my personality, but I definitely say I'm happy and content and at peace, and I feel very pleased to wake up in the morning to do whatever I'm going to do. I also feel very pleased at night to go to sleep. But I don't feel lots of joy and love. And some other people might. It's their personality, I guess. But the flatness is something that I was aware of when it was happening. And that isn't part of my experience, so it falls away.
Okay.
So you know, when I say that I don't experience, a whole day of continuous joy and love, someone might think that means, oh, that sounds very flat, but it isn't. The flatness you are talking about is not part of my life experience, and it was for some time. And while it was there, I thought, oh, this is odd. There is a slight uncomfortableness in the flatness. There is a sense of this. Is this it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And it doesn't feel like it can change, because it seems like it is the result of change. There's been so much change, and then you're left with this, and it seems like, oh, well, this is what I'm left with. But I think there's more. Yeah.
this feeling disappears when I meditate, for example, because in this space, then there's something I cannot name that then appears, and that's maybe the place I am. I feel things are not flat.
Yeah, you see, that's where I think that's because of where it's all about connecting to being, where the answer seems to be about being. In this phase, it's when you meditate, there is a sense of being that probably happens. And I would say that the change is where it's not even about being. The being sort of falls away, and the flatness falls away. So if you look at it, often the being is a result, like we want to drop into being because there is an uncomfortableness. That is the motivation to drop into being. If the uncomfortableness goes away, then the dropping into being becomes less needed in a way. And I think that's what's happening in this process, is a deepening in being, a dropping away of the attachment habit, and then once that's done, you end up with this hybrid that is the peace of mind I described, without the flatness and without the need for there to be being there either. So when someone says to me, oh, this journey is all about being, connecting to self, and I know when they're saying that, I can get a sense that they're talking about them sort of swimming in the beingness, like in meditation or just sitting in a park, witnessing life from a very beingness place. My response, it's ironic because at some point in the seeking, it's about trying to find that place of being, and it's all about shifting out of thinking into being. And that seems like it's the answer, because all of the suffering happens in the thinking, and then we drop into being and there is no suffering. And so it then seems like, being is my true self, my home, and that is liberation and enlightenment. What I'm suggesting here is that there is another movement that happens after that, where even being is not what peace of mind is. And so for a while, peace of mind and being seem like they are the same thing. And I would say, to someone, to certain seekers, I would say, no, peace of mind is even simpler than being. Even being is, in a way, it is an experience. Peace of mind is when being falls away, and there is just no suffering. And when there is no suffering, you just are Isabel, in daily life. In a way, no need to go to meditate. But I would be encouraged, actually, by what you're saying. I think this is... It sounds like everything is in order.
Okay. Anyway, so it's thank you. I would say thank you for... You bring a lot, really. It really helped.
Yeah, you're welcome. My pleasure. Thanks, Isabel. Hi, Jaroslav.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
I hope, Roger, that at today's satsang that there will be no freezing again. This on our computers. Yeah. So how are you today? Are you enjoying your Saturday?
Yes, very good.
Okay, nice to hear this. Yeah. So I'm not at a good memory what we mentioned in the last week, but I am on your satsang today nearly from the beginning. So couple questions like suggestions comes. So I just go with this. You said to the previous one, Isabel, that when there is no suffering, it's just about not suffering anymore. But you mean, please correct me if I'm wrong. Like in this no suffering, it can be still some like pain in the body or something like not comfortable. Let's say not comfortable experiences. But it's different. Our attitude is different to this happening. We just like in the honesty we appreciate what there is, and just like in a curious, this is the sensation, and just let's see what is. We don't want to like the change. There is no like identification that the psychological self wants to now. It can't be this. It must be different. I need to change this. So, yeah.
Yeah, yes, there's clearly peace of mind, which is talking about a comfortableness, is not talking about a physical or pleasure and pain comfortableness, but a comfortableness with oneself and comfortableness with the other. And as we get older, the body is going to break down, and that's what it does. It stops being as vibrant, and so there are plenty of examples of liberated humans that get sick in old age or at certain points, and they have to endure the pain of the sickness. But as you said, their attitude to the fact that they are getting old physically and maybe not in good health, the attitude is one of complete surrender and acceptance, like really a recognition, yes, this is life. What would you expect? In a way, you could say, what do you expect, that I'm going to be 80 and jumping around like I was when I was 20? So when they can't jump around like when they were 20, it makes complete sense. I think it's only the psychological self that says, but why can't I jump around like I want to jump around like I did when I was 20. That would be the self that simply can't align with how things are.
Yes, align with what it is. Psychological self has its own idea what it like can be or should be, or yeah, that's yes.
Yes.
And you said when we recognize life, or no, we see that we are alive, and the life has like this component of like not lacking anything.
When we recognize that we are, that I am. Yeah, when that becomes the purpose of life, that the purpose of life is to be. And whenever we remember or whenever we look, I am. And so then you realize in each moment, the purpose of life is being fulfilled by the fact that I am. I am means I know my existence. Not intellectually know my existence. It's not like, oh yes, Roger was born and he hasn't died yet. The body is here. I must exist. That is a conceptual knowing I am. Whereas I'm pointing at the direct, non-conceptual sense of being, which is to know that you are without thinking that you are, which might seem, very abstract, but really, if what it means, it's simply bumping into that consciousness that is here for everyone. So I often say, if you close your eyes and then I asked you the question, are you dead? But I said, don't answer it from your intellect. Answer the question, are you dead, from prior to the intellect, like experientially. Go to your experience to tell you if you are dead or not. And so that might help someone shift out of thinking into experiencing. Experience that you are not dead. And the way we experience that we are not dead is to feel the non-conceptual sense of I am, sense of existence. And that tells us experientially, directly, I am, I exist, I am not dead. Now I'm not, when I say dead, I'm not really talking about is the body dead, because this going to this sense of I am, this experiential sense of I am, it's best in my experience to do it with your eyes closed, when the world of form and including the body are much less present. So what you are going to as the experience is not the view of the room to tell you that you are alive, but the actual sense of existence on the realm of the formless. That is our consciousness, and that is always there, and it always is. It is, meaning it is not dead. It is always alive. I don't mean alive like bouncing around, but it has this fundamental sense of existence.
And like a little bit vibrant charge, like to say, like a little bit vibrant.
Well,
charge, like that.
No, I wouldn't even say that. I would say that it is not dead. You know, it is not. It is dead would be where it doesn't know itself. You know, it doesn't know it is alive. And I don't mean know in the intellect. So this is the thing. It is always, we always have it. This sense of existence, we've had it as part of our life experience. From the moment we wake up every day. And so it's something that is taken for granted. Now imagine if I took the sense of existence out of, if I could press a button and the sense of existence of Jaroslaw's sense of existence would vanish. You wouldn't, something very specific would vanish. If there was a button that is the vanish Jaroslaw's sense of existence, the most important thing would vanish, which would mean there wouldn't be any sense of Jaroslaw. There wouldn't be any sense of I am. And we just, because it's always there, we are not aware of it. And so becoming aware of that sense of existence is something quite profound, because it is the most important thing, and it is what allows us, or allows the shift to happen from it is about getting something. The purpose of life is about, well, often we say, I don't know what the purpose of life is, I need to find out what the purpose of life is. It shifts from that to, the purpose of life is I am. And then once we've found that, it's there all the time. So then this question of what is the purpose of life falls away.
But also this component of gratitude, awe, appreciation, this, but not like, maybe ego want to send some achievement or something like that. Just the ordinary things that already are at the moment, that you don't need to strive for something, because it's already. Mm-hmm. I think it's good one pointer. What is already? What is already? And this.
It is a good pointer, yes. Yeah, so all of these feelings, gratitude and all that, stem out of a connection to that self. Without a connection to the self, the I amness, I think gratitude is always gratitude for things, gratitude for the sunshine, gratitude for good food. And there is a gratitude for just being alive that comes when we connect to this I am. And then on top of that, once we know that we are grateful for being alive, then there is even more likelihood that there is gratitude for the sunshine and the good food and all of that. But yes, this real gratitude, I think, stems from, and that's why sometimes it's gratitude is our nature, is described as our nature. And same with peace is our nature, because it is very much stems from a recognition of our own consciousness.
Yes. Yes, but the conscious is come now is in relative sense, it comes from Roger's body and Jaroslav's body, and are we in privilege that we are not for example, animal, that we can this body can notice be. I don't want to put many layers but but it is, because maybe it could be opposite. It would be no experiences, no play, but is, and changing is always happening, and is, yeah. And so I for today I must to say goodbye, because there is a ringing to my door, and yeah. So
very good.
Take care, please.
Thank you, Jaroslav. I'll just take Rajesh's question because we've got the time, and Cecilia and Candace hopefully next time. So I'll just take Rajesh.
Hi, Roger.
Hello.
Am I audible?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah. First of all, I would like to express my gratitude, and I do listen to the videos, and there are no words that I can express the amount of clarity that they bring to my life. I wanted to ask something that you often bring in some of the intensives, and I have also heard Ramesh Balsekar bring this concept that we look at life as a continuum, in the sense that it's like a block, it's like a blob with starting to end, everything contained, in one set, and things just come to our awareness, mm-hmm. and go. But the the virtual start and the virtual end, everything is in a box, let's say, and it's like a block which is already there. I remember Ramesh Valsekar used to describe as a puzzle. It's a big jigsaw puzzle, and you're looking at a very single piece of. So in order, how do we validate that theory? I know that with our limited instruments that we have, I don't think that it is possible for us to validate, somebody going out and looking at the block as one. That probably cannot be done. Then how does this theory, how do we convince the intellect, or how does this theory get validated that, it's a block which is there, which is having past, present, future, everything in one point, and it just comes to our awareness, as and when it happens.
The trick is that what we can validate, what we can see as essentially like seeing the block, it isn't seeing the block. So let me just say, for the benefit of the people listening, the concept is that all of the manifestation from the beginning of time to the end of time exists as a block, a predetermined creation of life, that the beginning, the middle, and the end all exist simultaneously, and that what has been created as the entirety of time unfolds exactly as it is destined to unfold. And so your question is, how is it that we can go beyond knowing that concept as simply a concept and know it more directly, so that we have our own knowing of that rather than just a conceptual understanding? That's correct?
That's absolutely correct.
Yeah. So that concept is pointing at the nature of experience, as opposed to the theoretical understanding that we have of life as a physical existence, or a physical reality, based on time and space. So, and it would appear that our experience of life as something based on time and space is actually experiential and not conceptual. That's what it would appear like. When we investigate it, we find that the notion we have about what life is, what, let's say, the universe is, this time-space reality, when we investigate it, we find that it is seeing one side of the coin as if it is absolute, as if that's how it is. And when we see that an experience of ours is formed based on seeing one side of a coin and taking it to be absolute, taking it to be all there is, then we can see that that experience is actually heavily influenced by concept. What that means is that when we see beyond what we have cognized and what has therefore created our experience, we're inserting into our previous model, our previous cognitive model, a change. And if we see that once that cognitive addition is, or maybe it's just loosening some of the beliefs in the model that say, life is a time and space continuum. If that is loosened, then essentially our model changes. And if our experience shifts, the experience of life shifts, then we realize that, oh, the previous experience that I thought was experiential and not conceptually influenced, then we realize, oh, it was conceptually influenced, because once my conceptual understanding is changed, then the experience changes. And so all of that is to demonstrate, because I said that we might not realize that our experience of life as a time-space reality is conceptual, because it appears like, no, I'm saying it's a time-space reality based on my experience of it, not based on a concept. But is it possible that our experience is influenced by false concepts? And I would suggest, yes, that is exactly what happens, is our experience is influenced by false concepts. So we can experience life as a block, or at least experience something that is very correlated with this notion of life as a block. And that is to experience the present moment as a block, just the present moment as a block, rather than the beginning of time to the end of time as a block. And if we get to experience the present moment as a block, then what is pointed at in that concept as all of time is a block is simply an extrapolation of what is able to be seen experientially in the present moment. Does that make sense so far?
Yes, it does.
Yeah. So the linchpin that needs to be pulled in order for the experience of life as a time-space continuum to shift to a present moment spontaneous block is very much time, the concept of time, and the concept of space. If we start playing around with and investigating time and space, that is what has the power to change how we see the present moment experience. And it's very linked to awakening. That shift is very linked to awakening, because once time and space is broken down and seen to be a concept, that time and space don't really exist as we think they exist. So when we see that we have a concept of time and space that translates into an experience of time and space, it tends to allow us to see past the physical, which is the body, and see into the essence or the consciousness, which is on the level of the formless. So if we deconstruct time and space, it deconstructs the physical body as well. So what that means is that the physical world will still continue to exist, but in the moment it will be seen to be a spontaneous arising in consciousness that is an appearance of a physical world rather than necessarily the existence of a physical object. So the body is often experienced as a physical object, and therefore we say, well, because there is the experience of a physical object, the body is a physical object. Now, that's not necessarily true, because if there is an sorry, you were saying? Can you hear me, Rajesh?
Hello. Yeah, it got frozen in between.
Oh, right. Okay. I was saying, because we have the experience of a physical body, doesn't actually mean that that it is a physical body. And that is the conclusion that we draw, is we have the experience of a physical body, and therefore we say, therefore, the body is physical. So this is why I started off saying it has to do with us exploring the nature of experience. And when we think about it, of course, if you have an experience of time and space, meaning if an experience is created of time and space, and then it is experienced, it means it will create the impression of time and space. If an experience is created to be an experience of physicality, which essentially is linked to space, or form, if it is an experience created to be an experience of form, when that experience is experienced, it will feel like form. If an experience is created to be an experience of duality, it will have the experience of duality. And if an experience is created such that it is an experience of oneness, when it is experienced, it will be experienced as oneness. So the nature of experience is that whatever is experienced will be what the experience is and how it is designed to be experienced. So if we have an experience of being color, for example, in some psychedelic or some mystical experience, where there is no world of form and no world of time, there is just color, and I am color, which might sound very strange if someone hasn't had various psychedelic type of experiences. But in a dream, you might have the experience of being a dog in one particular dream, or an animal, or not human, or maybe a human of different sex to what you normally are, different gender. So all of these things are possible because experience can be created to basically be anything. And so the suggestion is that the world of time and space is an experience. The world of being a human being is an experience. And so when we look at what creates the notion of time, we see that time exists because of a lot of components in the present moment. Thought components, like memory, is a very important one. Without memory, if you look at a present moment and you get rid of a memory, which is a thought essentially arising in the present moment, the notion of a past doesn't exist. So the past only comes into existence when a memory arises in the present moment. Now, we're so used to thinking about time and space as a reality of time and space. We say, well, we relate to our memories not as thought objects arising in the present moment, but we say, I have a memory because of what happened. And we will neglect to see that the memory is an intermediary between what happened and what is not happening now. And so once we see the memory, which is often the memory just gives us the impression of the past, and we don't see it as an object in the present moment. Once we start seeing memory as an object in the present moment, we start to appreciate that the past is an illusion created in the present moment by the presence of certain objects, such as memory. And the same with space. Space is an illusion created by lines and by perspective. So if you play around with drawings, you can create the experience of 3 dimensions on a 2-dimensional piece of paper using shadow and lines and perspective. And then you come to the present moment and you realize, oh, the present moment might be an illusion of space, and it could be a 2-dimensional image that appears to be 3-dimensional. Then we move our hand through space and we say, oh, well, it's not 2-dimensional, it's 3-dimensional. But if we realize that moving our hand through space takes time, we realize that that means there could be many 2-dimensional images strung together in what we then will say is the appearance of time and space. So this experience we have of time and space, when we start to deconstruct it or start to investigate it, we see that it exists because of very many objects that arise in the present moment to create a certain impression. What that leaves behind at some point is the fact that there is a present moment experience and consciousness experiencing what is here now, and there is nothing outside of this. That what exists is just this. And that means that the present moment can be seen as a block of what is, that is being replaced by a new block of what is, being replaced by a new block of what is, being replaced by a new block of what is, creating the impression of time and space. Now, we're talking about it intellectually, but as those intellectual thoughts lead to an investigation of the present moment, there may be insights that are beyond the intellectual concept and will reveal a depth to the present moment that is very different to the impression of life as a physical and time-based reality. And that starts to show the other side of the coin. And that is about the extent of my answer to your question for today.
Thank you, Roger. I really appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I'll try and upload today's satsang, so it can be, you can re-listen to it. Thank you, everybody.